Puppa Puja Vannagandha Gunopetang Etang Kusuma.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Taipei Discussion and Learning. Today we have Pannaloka, right? Wadinagala Pannaloka.
Okay. Yeah, Pannaloka.
Sorry for my pronunciation.
No
Also known as Ming Guang. It's easier to remember his Chinese name. He will talk about the controversy of the first teaching of Buddha, of the Buddha. So everyone knows what Buddhism is, I guess. A short introduction about Buddhism. Buddhism started when in like a 6th or 5th century BC. There was a king and his son called Siddhartha Gautama was ready to become king when he grew up, but his father didn't let him go out and see the world. Finally he went out somehow. He saw the world, he saw death, sickness, old age, and he realized that the reality is something completely different. So he tried to find a way for this suffering, and eventually he came to to 4 statements, which are today known as the 4 Noble Truths. And this speech is going to be about controversy of these 4 Noble Truths. So I think Mingguan can now start his speech.
Thank you, Alex. I'm Pannaloka. My Chinese name is Ming Guang. I think it's easy to remember. I'm from Sri Lanka. My whole life is like this. It means I'm a Buddhist monk. I became a monk at the age of 12. Now I'm nearly 40, but not yet 40. So it's actually nice opportunity to meet you people here. And as he introduced my topic is controversial, the first teaching of the Buddha, but the aspect that I am going to emphasize in this paper, I had to explain first, because I think this paper originally was written for some other audience, so who are much familiar about Buddhism. So I think this is a little bit I have to explain. Okay, if you go directly to the topic, in Buddhism there are 3 major traditions. Buddhism we can divide it into 3 traditions. One is we call Theravada Buddhism, the other is Mahayana Buddhism, the third one is Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhism. So these 3 traditions are different interpretations about the Buddha, we call Sakya Muni Gautama, the Buddha, his teachings. According to these 3 traditions, the concerning his first discourse, it means after he left his home and he made a research or he practiced with the Indian spiritual teachers for 6 years, and after that he got understanding or realization of the life and the truth of the world. So then because actually the Buddha means one who was awakened or one who was enlightened to the truth. So first, after gaining his enlightenment experience, he started teaching his understanding, or he was about to share his teaching with the people. So then, according to the Theravada Buddhism, he went from the place where he got his experience to another place. He traveled maybe, I don't know how much. In India it's very big land. So he went to another place. That place is called Benares. Even now we use Benares. So there he met his friends, 5 friends. They were with him before he got enlightenment, but due to some problem during his career, they left him. But after got enlightenment, he thought they are the most suitable people to listen to my teaching. So he selected these 5 group of monks, and he went to Benares and he gave his first teaching. Okay, the first teaching basically emphasize two factors. One is he introduced some theory about practice of spirituality. That is, we call middle path. And the rest of the teaching is called Four Noble Truths. In especially the Theravada Buddhism, from which I am coming, and also the people recognize this is the oldest form of Buddhism, and normally we accept Mahayana and Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhism, a little bit later development. So Theravada Buddhism is normally accepted as the much closer to the Buddha's original teaching. So once he met these 5 months, he taught about the middle path and the Four Noble Truths. In the first place, he said that this middle path, I think perhaps you may be knowing, or I don't know, middle path indicates in the Indian context one who was seeking the truth. Normally they fell into two extremes. One is indulgence in sensuality, because it means gratification, sensual gratification is one way, and the other is self-mortification, practicing sort of extreme kind of torturing body. They believe torturing body is sort of way to eliminate desire. So this is the path. But the Gautama Buddha, he realized neither self-mortification nor sense indulgence are the way to get enlightenment or to liberate from suffering. So first he emphasized, actually this perhaps maybe misunderstand. Here Buddha emphasizes who are really looking for the enlightenment or who are looking for the liberation. For such people, these two things are extremes, because you know sensuality is normal for the ordinary life or the who lead a lay life, we call. So, but this is not for such people. This is for who are given to the cause of seeking liberation. So such one who is ardently working for total liberation in the Indian context, Buddha said, you cannot follow these two, and you cannot get into enlightenment following these two extremes. So that is the middle path. So in his middle path, he gave, it means avoiding these two, he indicates there is another way. So this middle path he included as the fourth truth of his teaching. So it is, I can come to it later. So then he started giving the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths is one is the truth of suffering first. The second is the truth of origin of suffering, and the third is the truth of cessation, and the fourth is the way to cessation, the truth of way to cessation. So these are the four, and his middle path is included in the fourth truth, the way to cessation or way to liberation or way to nirvana. So in this he has formulated his, in these four truths he has formulated his entire doctrine. Once the Buddha said, I have taught only how suffering arises and how suffering ceases, how we have to work for that. Only these two things I taught throughout my entire career. So this is the fundamental. Okay, maybe we can, if you are interested, we can talk in detail what is the suffering and those things in detail. But because I'm not going to deal with the contents of each truth, I'm talking about different aspects. It means, okay, so this teaching was recorded in Pali language. In Pali language, there is in the Pali canon. Pali is, you know, is a dialect, already dead language in India at the Buddha's time. Buddha, we believe Buddha used this dialect to give his discourses to the people. It's a Middle Indian dialect, Pali. So in this language, the Theravada Buddhism up to date, we are maintaining whole the Buddha's discourses in the language of Pali, and it is we have canonized. So in the canon, there is the discourse called, in Pali language we use Dhamma Chakkapavatana. It means turning the wheel of the Dhamma. Turning the wheel of the Dhamma. It indicates his initiation of his teaching career. Okay. Theravada Buddhists, they believe this titled discourse is the first discourse of the Buddha, and whatever mentioned in this discourse is entirely established truth. So, okay, this is within the Theravada tradition. And further, okay, Mahayana tradition also accept this was the first turning of the wheel by the Buddha, even though they have different interpretation of second and third, etc. But concerning the first, the Buddhists normally accept. But all are not Buddhist. In 19th century, the Buddhism was open to the Westerners, and they started to read these texts, and they found some, okay, against the traditional belief about these teachings. There are some inconsistencies or certain gaps, or no evidence or no facts to believe certain ideas. So they found, first time, one scholar, a British scholar, he said, okay, this teaching of the Four Noble Truth and the middle path, which is included in this particular discourse, doctrinal wise, there's no problem. But actually, whether it was historical matter, whether Buddha held this according to this traditional belief, did or not, is doubtful. He said the historical value is a question. So this is one question I have tried to examine in my paper. And okay, that is in the end of the 19th century. And again in the 20th century, another British scholar, he has done great job actually in West to research about Buddhism. He is called Richard Gombrich. If you maybe you can type, you can find number of books and articles. Oh, he's a great scholar. Okay. However, he questioned this discourse. Actually, even though the Theravada tradition believe each sentence, each word, each concept included here is originally came from the Buddha, and at within one particular discourse, Buddha gave all these. But he said it is doubtful. We don't know exactly all these contents were given in one particular discourse, one discourse. So I grasp my question from his statement. I name it as maybe the problem of contents. So it means all the contents, whether Buddha taught at first time. So these are the two questions I tried to address in my paper. So how I tried to answer these questions is twofold. One is I tried to check within the Pali canon, within our tradition, how this discourse has been referred to in apart from this discourse. It means another, okay, in the Buddhist discourse, if there are 100 different texts, so this discourse comes in number 1. So I check whether apart from number 1 there are 99 discourses left, whether it is referred to in other discourses as something historical fact or historical matter. This was my method to approach to settle the problem of historicity. So if something, in my understanding, if the same text is recorded or if it is referred to as a certain event took place in a certain stage in the history, it support this is actually a certain historical event that took place in some age. So one is that it means within my own canon, Pali language, I search other texts, and the other method is I try to refer to now we have ability Buddhist teachings normally, now in my understanding, whole Buddhist teachings, if we divide it into textual traditions, we can divide into 2. One is Pali tradition. Pali tradition belong to Theravada Buddhism, and the countries like Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma, Laos and Cambodia mainly. These countries, the Buddhist people or the scholars, they study Buddhism in Pali language. They go to the Pali language to refer to the Buddha's teaching. And the other one is in Chinese language. In China, once Buddhism reached to China, they did a great job of translation all these Buddhist texts. So all belong to the Theravada tradition or Mahayana. All these were translated into Chinese. So now Chinese, and comparing Pali and Chinese nowadays has been the trend to verify certain doubtful facts about some discourses. So this comparative method. So this discourse, what I am referring, turning of the wheel of the Dhamma, this particular discourse, I check whether in Chinese canon or in Chinese literature is recorded or not. And at the same time, there is one important point of checking this within the Chinese tradition, because in the Chinese tradition, the Pali texts in the Theravada tradition belong to one sectarian origin. You know, after the Buddha was passed away, after 100 years of his passing away, the Buddhist community, they divided into different sects based on their different interpretation towards the Buddha's teaching. So the Theravada tradition only records one tradition or one sect. That is, we call Theravada, or in history we call in Chinese tradition they call it a small vehicle, or Xiaoshan, Hinayan. Our tradition we call Sangchopu. Sangchopu means is Theravada, or now we call Theravada. It is one tradition, and our texts all belong to this tradition. But in the Chinese text and in the Chinese canon, the Theravada section or the Xiaoshan Pupan, this section is included in the text called Agama, or in Chinese they call Ahanching. But Pali Nikaya, we call Pali tradition is Nikaya, the Chinese we call Agama. But Nikaya, only one tradition. But Agama, within the Agama, several traditions. There are at the one tradition was called Sarvastivada and Lokottaravada and Mahisasaka, etc., etc. Several traditions are included in the Agama texts. They are also very similar to Pali discourse, but they belong to different sects. So once we compare, we can find what is not mentioned in the Pali tradition. Sometimes they are included in the Chinese tradition because there are different textual traditions. So I tried to check this discourse, the Buddha's, according to our view, the Buddha's first teaching, whether it's similarly or without much change, these contents and historical setting, whether it is mentioned in these different Chinese texts, in different Chinese Agama texts. So that was the method I tried to answer the problem of historicity and problem of the extent of contents of the discourse. So within the Pali tradition, I found the Pali canon we divided into three. One is discourses, the other one is discipline section, the other one is we call what is okay, we call it in Abhidhamma, or that is much philosophical text, one tradition. So these three sects or three groups of teachings. We in Pali language we call Sutta means discourses, the Vinaya means the discipline, and the Abhidharma means treatises actually, or sort of philosophical arguments. So I found in the Sutta discourses or and the Vinaya or the discipline section, whether this was recorded in other discourses. So I found within the Sutta discourses there are 2 or 3 texts. They refer to this event. It means Buddha got enlightenment and he went to Benares and he gave his first teaching to the 5 monks, or 5 ascetics actually. 5 ascetics, his teaching. And in this discourse included the Four Noble Truths and his emphasis on the middle path, and there are 3 or 12-fold understanding about these Four Noble Truths. These are the main ideas included, and these contents were mentioned in 2 or 3 mainly in Sutta discourses, and in the Vinaya or the discipline group or the discipline section of the text. At the beginning there is one text called Mahavagga. In this, actually these are Pali terms. In this text it narrates the story of the Buddha's enlightenment. So in this narration, or these are we consider as sort of biographical parts of the Buddha's life. Actually in the text we cannot find a consistent biography of the Buddha. There are some bit and pieces. So one piece we can find in the Vinaya section of the Pali canon. There it mentions Buddha got enlightenment, he went to Benares and he gave this teaching to the 5 monks. This one is included in the Sutta section or the discourse section. In the Sutta section we divide into five texts mainly. We call one is long discourses, one is middle, the second is connected discourses, numerical, and small one. So in the third one, connected discourses, there is a very detailed analysis. The first, it records Buddha gave this teaching to the 5 monks and Four Noble Truths, and continuously it analyzes and it emphasizes how this doctrine is important. For me, this emphasis in the Sutta section indicates the traditional understanding or how Theravada tradition considered with esteem towards this particular discourse and its contents. So in the Vinaya also we can find the same contents and the same setting. So within my tradition I found, apart from this, okay, if it is only one event, it cannot be several places. Once Buddha talking with some other people, he said, I went to Benares, I met 5 monks and I gave this discourse. So one discourse is called Noble Search. Noble Search. In this discourse, Buddha just mentioned, I got enlightenment, I went to Benares. But in that part he does not mention what was the contents of his teaching. In the Pali, it is not clear. But I checked the Chinese version of that text. In Chinese, this Noble Search Discourse exists. So I checked how this Chinese text records this one. It is better and it is much clearer than the Pali one. It mentions directly Buddha taught eightfold, the middle part to the 5 monks. So this way I try to analyze my own tradition first and whether other discourses support this as a historical event. So in my understanding, within my tradition, there are textual evidence to record this as an actual historical happening. That is one. Okay, the second part, contents. In content, I did not try within my tradition because it is obvious, but I checked the Chinese texts. Chinese texts in Chinese, actually this discourse totally we can find in Pali, Chinese, Sanskrit and Tibetan. In 4 languages we can find totally there are 17 versions of this discourse. There's a very good research about this 17. I didn't touch all those things. In my paper I only select Pali and Chinese and some Sanskrit because I wanted to find some different sectarian origins, because these 17 we can find different sectarian traditions. So, but I didn't touch the Tibetan versions of this discourse. I just checked only the Chinese and Sanskrit, mainly Chinese. So in Chinese I found actually because these Chinese texts are different, belong to, as I mentioned, different sectarian origins, but I found the Four Noble Truth is no difference from the Pali text. And in some Chinese versions there is the reference to middle part and mainly the 12-fold understanding about the Four Noble Truth. What is 12-fold? We can discuss it later if you are interested. So through this, maybe much. Yes, 5 minutes. Okay. I think I. So, as in my investigation into the text, okay, within the Pali tradition, the contents same within the Sutta and the Vinaya discourse. In Chinese, there are some differences, but major thing is the Four Noble Truths is no difference. It's all same as the Pali discourse recorded. And in Sanskrit, there's one text, they are very similar to the Pali one, but this is also a different sectarian text from our tradition. The second Chinese source, it has some differences, but Four Noble Truth and the 12-fold understanding about the Four Noble Truth is the same. So in my this is a very rough work, and I don't consider it is academic, but however there is some attempt here. So in this attempt I find I can support my tradition because we have to protect certain ideas, but not blindly. I tried in this way whether this is okay, but I feel through these different texts and different sectarian origins, what the Theravada Buddhists believe as the Buddha's first discourse and his historicity and its contents cannot be highly doubtful. We can agree with traditional idea. That was my conclusion. That this is the way I try to come to my conclusion. Yes, sir.
Okay,
But
thank
it's
you.
maybe very abstract or maybe some controversial, but we can discuss.
Okay. Ayo tathayati vinasa bhavam